but you are still necessary to the plans of God. Indeed, let's jump into a morning reflection very quickly. This morning, I am talking about, the listener, often ignored issues in relationships. Often ignored issues in relationships. Why am I talking about this, dear listener? It's because I had a case in my office this past week where a couple came in, and the issue they were having were a bit big. Those an affair that had been going on for a very long time, that had produced about 2 children thereabout. And the issue that was there was that when you're having a conversation, the funny thing was that they had never fought. This man and his wife had never fought, had never argued. It was a very, very peaceful marriage up to the best of their knowledge. Yet there were things that were happening within the marriage that actually were fighting their marriage, and they did not know. So at times we normally think that it's the big things, dear listener. And many a times, dear listener, it's not the big things, it's the things we tend to ignore. So I'm going to talk about, dear listener, the things that we often ignored issues, the often ignored issues that come about in relationships. Number one, dear listener, is tomorrow. Tomorrow. What do I mean by tomorrow? Tomorrow is one of the most subtle, silent enemies to any relationship, because tomorrow takes away the urgency of me being available today. It takes away the urgency of me dealing with something today. Every time I'm moving things away, I'm moving them to tomorrow. Today I'm a bit tired, let's do this tomorrow. And you find many couples have postponed things to tomorrow. They have postponed holidays to tomorrow. They have postponed making love to tomorrow. They have postponed budgeting to tomorrow. They have postponed date night to tomorrow. Everything has been moved to tomorrow. And that tomorrow actually in marriage never really comes, because every tomorrow has got its own challenges. So you find one of the primary issues that come to a relationship and affect it, dear listener, is what I'm calling tomorrow. Tomorrow. You have to act as though in your relationship that today is the only day you have. As long as you have tomorrow, and you're married and you have tomorrow, then, dear listener, you are likely to set up a very long tomorrow. Remember, too many tomorrows create a habit. Too many tomorrows create a habit. So you have to ensure that you are dealing with things today. That's why if you have conflict, resolve it today. Don't be the one who says, I will do this tomorrow. Who said there'll be that tomorrow? And many marriages actually do break in that tomorrow. So, dear listener, enemy number one that is ignored is tomorrow. Don't postpone your relationship. Don't postpone your marriage. Act as though today is the only day you have available to you. Number two, this is very, 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 very relatable. Number two, dear listener, is fatigue. Fatigue. I want to talk about fatigue in the context of one, physical fatigue, two, emotional fatigue. Because every marriage or every relationship has got something I call emotional capital. All of us have got emotional capital. When I get in a relationship with someone, I enter with emotional capital. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that if I burn through my emotional capital, then immediately I enter into burnout and fatigue. In burnout and fatigue is where the fights happen, is where the affairs happen. Statistically, actually, about 67% of men who have had affairs, 67% of men who had affairs, dear listener, have attributed it mainly, dear listener, to a lapse of judgment because of fatigue. 67%. Now, on the contrary, again, this is which is very interesting as well, is that about 71% of women who have had affairs attribute it to emotional fatigue. She had reached a point where she had emotionally burnt out, and that is where a door opened. So you can see how fatigue is an ignored enemy. But you find we are going, you're never taking leave, you're never refreshing, you're never going for time to meditate, to be by yourself, to rebuild your emotional capacity or your physical capacity. So you find that it is easier now, and I've given the two examples because men and women are wired differently. The men, you find that men, about 67% of them, affairs happened, dear listener, because they were tired, had a lapse of judgment based on fatigue, physical fatigue. And that is why it is important to find a way to rest. Women, on the other hand, emotional fatigue, burnout. The children are demanding, the husband is demanding, the house is demanding, the job is demanding, her mother is demanding, the woman has given. She's at a place of emotional debt. There is no more emotional capital. Fatigue, dear listener, is an enemy often ignored. Ukiona mwenzako amechoka, apumzike. If you find your husband is tired, tell him to take time to rest, to recover. Your wife is tired, tell her to take a break. Send her away for a holiday. Give her time to rest. that will be able to recharge. Number 3, this is a very strange one, by the way, but very important, is growth. Growth is an ignored enemy of marriage. And this is the funny thing about growth. It's that many marriages never take into account the possibility of what happens when they grow. I'll say that again. Many marriages don't understand what happens when, or never take into account the possibility of growth. But at the end of the day, I am not the man who my wife met many years ago. I am not the woman who my husband met many years ago. I am growing. As an individual, I am growing. As I age, I am growing one way or another. 2, as I live, I experience. As I experience, I grow. Do we factor in that? Number 3, they are children. When the children grow, we also grow. The challenges that come with the marriage, we grow as well. I once talked about growth in marriage and talked about the various forms of growth in marriage. And I said one of the factors we normally ignore is what I call the Kana effect. And the Kana effect in marriage, dear listener, is when the marriage matures quicker than it should have. This happens maybe when something traumatic happens, like a death in the family or whatever. It moves the marriage emotionally to a place of maturity. So we never factor in that at some point we will grow. Something else we never look at is how our lives just change. Is that it was easier when we had a small house. It was easier when we didn't have anything to do. It was easier. Now I have gotten this dream job and I'm flying every 1 week. I'm on the air. I'm halfway across the world. Did I account for growth? When I got married, I was this person. I was junior staff at my office. Now I am the CEO. I have meetings from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. How do I account for growth? Now this is where marriages get broken. You find that someone's life was normal until something about growth came about. They were appointed to a powerful position in the government. But it means that every time they're surrounded by very many people, they have no time, their time is no longer their own. Did you factor in growth? We all grow, dear listener. And it's important that in a marriage to always take time to account that both of you are growing and examine how both of you are growing. Number 4, before I go on this break, is assumption. Assumption. We can never say enough about assumption. Because one of the key things that is an ignored issue is that assumption gives me a wrong perception every single time. I always preempt your attitude, your mood, your words, your response. I always assume your intentions. In assumption, you always push your partner away because they'll always feel as though you don't want to understand them and you have taken time to build your own script. Assumption is an often ignored enemy of marriage because we always forget, the one who's assuming always forgets how much they push the other person away. The one who assumes never, in fact, assumes that they're still together. Assumption is dangerous. Number 2, assumption is dangerous because you also assume that the marriage is working, yet it is not working. Assumption is basically laziness. I have not chosen to understand the facts. I am choosing to assume what I think is right. And that, dear listener, is an ignored enemy because marriages end because someone was assuming it was okay. I've seen couples in my office where people are shocked that the spouse is saying, I have not been happy for 10 years. Mtu anastuka, 10 years, 10 years, you have not been happy. And yes, they have not been happy, but you are assuming that your perspective was the right perspective. A dangerous, ignored issue in most of our relationships, dear listener. After this short break, I will give you the remaining 2. Stay tuned. This is unnoticeable. I'm Victor Salamba, dear listener. I'm talking about, dear listener, often ignored issues in relationships. Often ignored issues in relationships. And I'm saying this because I say that there are things at times that happen that you can actually ignore, yet they are the ones that bring issues at the very end. Remember, there used to be an African saying that says that it's that it is a mouse that can make an elephant fall. It's a mouse that can make an elephant fall. And this will be available on my Facebook page, Victor Salamba, during the course of the day. Number 5, dear listener, often ignored issue in relationships, dear listener, is the absence of conflict. Absence of conflict. Now, this is a paradox, by the way, because you'd actually assume that the absence of conflict is generally peace. But that is actually false. The absence of conflict in any relationship, and I say this because part of what makes a relationship healthy is the quality of conflict. And I'll say that again. What makes or tests a relationship's maturity is the quality of conflict. Every relationship has to have a form of conflict within because you are two different human beings. You are not in a relationship with yourself. And even in yourself, you have what you call internal conflicts. So it's the quality of conflict. If the marriage has got a system and a method of addressing conflict in a mature way, then that is a healthy marriage. Because conflict is part of what makes a healthy marriage. The ability where I can be different from my wife, have a different opinion, differ of a particular point of view, and find a way, dear listener, to still come together and make peace. The quality of conflict. Now, there are marriages where there is no conflict at all. There is absolute silence. Then you wonder where affairs creep in such marriages. If your marriage is too silent for comfort, dear listener, it's good you begin to understand there might be another problem. Both of you are just avoiding. There's something called the avoidant style of connection in relationships, where people tend to run away and never deal with issues, yet they're together. If you and your partner never deal with issues, there is a high possibility, dear listener, there are silent issues that are burning into your relationship, dear listener. There are certain issues that are burning into your relationship, and you must be able to know about them. The next point, dear listener, is information. Information is an often ignored enemy of marriages. Why is Victor saying information? It's because the quality of life you live is based on the quality of information that you get. Now, many a times in marriage, you never want to know. One, we never take time to understand how we relate. We don't want to get people to tell us how to relate. So there's an absence or lack of information. That is problem number one. Problem number two about information also, the people we listen to. You cannot be a married man or a married woman surrounded by 7 people who are divorced. Your level of information will interfere with your marriage. It's an ignored area, but very powerful. If you're a man, you have 4 friends. You meet on Saturdays to have to watch football, and when you meet with your 4 friends, all of them come with their side chicks. Automatically, that is information. That is information. You know, if you're always watching pornography, that is information. If you're sitting with women who are talking about how all men are dogs and how all men should be done what, that is information. Information is a critical area of our marriages. What information do you have about marriage? What information do you have about your partner? Who feeds you about family life? Who feeds you about being a man? Who feeds you about being a woman? Who feeds you about being a husband? Where do you get your data from? What movies do you watch? You know, where do you hang out? Who do you hang out with? Information, dear listener, is an often ignored issue in marriage. We are not keen to look at who is speaking in our lives. Where do you go to church? What is the doctrine of the church that you go to or your partner goes to? You know, who do you talk to on social media? What WhatsApp groups are you in? I had a case in my office a few weeks ago of this man was in a WhatsApp group, and people were sending nude pictures every other 2 days. And suddenly the man found himself now, it became so normal to him. And now he began demanding other things from his wife that he should never have demanded of. Dear listener, it is important to understand that information is a normally ignored issue in marriages. Where do you get your data from? Who feeds you information? That is very, very important, dear listener. You're on 88.3 FM. This is Waumini Soul Food. I'm Victor Salamba, dear listener. And I'm glad you've been with us since early in the morning. Listener, my reflection will be available on my Facebook page, Victor Salamba, during the course of the day.